Good morning, everybody. It is, or good afternoon, maybe, depending which class you're in. It is Thursday, September 9th. I'd like to talk through with you what I expect you to do today. So when you come to class, this week we've spent some time with events that are leading to the American Revolution. We know that we're frustrated about taxes. We're frustrated about policies of the British. They're trying to make us pay for the French and Indian War. We don't think that's very fair. On Wednesday's class, that tension and that frustration boiled over into violence in the Boston Massacre story. 5 Boston residents wind up dead at the hands of British soldiers. Well, today we're going to put Captain Preston on trial for murder because we know that these 5 people are dead and his British soldiers made that happen. If Captain Preston is found guilty, he'll hang, and so will his soldiers. You'll do that story throughout the course of the class today. Let me show you what you're going to do before you do the Boston Massacre trial and some things you're going to do after that. So in Canvas, you're going to September 6th through 10th. And when you open that up, you will, of course, scroll down to Thursday, September 9th. Right now, you are watching this Clarkey video reviewing yesterday's work, turning up the heat on those not completing the work I assigned Tuesday and Wednesday. And I'll get to that part in a minute, where many of you are not doing what you're supposed to be doing here, and I'm not happy about that. Here's something you're going to do in just a couple minutes, though. You're going to use the social studies skills of comparing and contrasting to analyze 2 different images of the Boston Massacre. You'll open this first view, or your substitute, who I think is going to be Mrs. Coop, will pass out 2 copies of these pictures. One of them is a image of the Boston Massacre from 1770. This image was made shortly after the Boston Massacre happened, maybe within a week. In fact, this picture, this version of the Boston Massacre got printed in newspapers all over the colonies and even was visible back in England. People saw it in England even before Captain Preston's official report about what happened got there. So everybody has this image in mind. This is kind of a primary source because Paul Revere made this at the time this was going on. He may not have actually been there. I mean, he lived in Boston. He was an artist and a silversmith. He did woodcuts like this for newspapers, which was a slow and difficult process. But yeah, it's the real Paul Revere, the one who's later famous for the Midnight Ride, who made this, showing an American side of the story. Now, the other painting, or the other image, which is a painting that you're going to look at, is a different view of the Boston Massacre. This one made by an artist named Alonzo Chappelle. He's got a very different view of the Boston Massacre. He painted this in 1868, almost 100 years after the massacre. Definitely a secondary source because he couldn't possibly have been there and seen it himself because he wasn't alive. But this shows things to be very different. So you're going to use those 2 pieces of artwork, and we're going to use the skills of comparing and contrasting. You'll open this compare and contrast sheet, and what you do to be able to modify this is you will go to open the little paper clip. When you open that, it gives you your own copy of compare and contrast. Now here's the trick for you. Unfortunately, there's one more step in here that we wish wasn't there, but you're going to open this with Google Docs. When you do, now you can modify it and it will save it so I can see it. So you're going to compare these 2 pictures, starting with that color picture by Paul Revere, and you're going to list at least 5 items. You can keep going to impress me, and impressing me is a good idea. You can list some things you see that are only in the color picture. Like there's a dog in there. You will see some in the black and white picture. You want to list at least 5 items you see only in the black and white image. Like, for example, there's debris flying through the air. No, my one thing that I have listed here does not count as one of your 5. And then you want to list at least 5 items you observe in both images. There's truth in both of them, although exaggeration to be sure, and some things that probably aren't really accurate. So that's what you're doing before you do the Boston Massacre trial by completing those couple of items about comparing and contrasting the images. Then you're going to do the trial of the Boston Massacre. Yesterday we have the Boston Massacre happening. Crispus Attucks is the first American to go down, and sometimes we consider him the first death of the American Revolution. So you are going to read through the massacre trial play and reenactment. Again, when I write these plays and reenactments, I do this with real people and real events, at least as much as we can do in a cement block classroom. And so a lot of the names of people are real, the circumstances are real. I've done a lot of research to make these work, and so I hope you enjoy doing those. It's kind of a staple of American Cultures class, is to have you being the people we're learning about and doing what they're doing. You'll read through that, whether either you use the link here or your substitute may pass out the plays and you actually do them, different people taking roles and doing the parts. Eventually, of course, you'll want to answer today's LEQ: was justice served in the Boston Massacre trial? Now, like previous LEQs, we want to see if you learned something today. So here's your chance to prove to me you have learned something. Now, the rubric goes along with all of these, like we've mentioned before. But 3 is what everybody is shooting for. Complete sentence, 20 words or more, showing me that you've learned something new today. In the case of was justice served, does that mean, did this trial actually turn out right? Was the jury's verdict fair to Captain Preston and the British soldiers? Was it reasonable for the citizens of Boston? For all the things that happened in March 1770, did this come out right? So that's what we mean by was justice served. Now, the other thing I want to tell you about, if I go back to American Cultures, and if we go back to this week, Tuesday, you were to do a number of activities leading to events of the American Revolution. You are doing, you were watching 2 Edpuzzle videos about the Sugar Act and the Stamp Act. I'm very disappointed about how few kids actually did that. You were to write about funny pranks. I got a lot of funny ideas. Haha. About 52 of us actually did that out of 92. That's not a very good percentage. A lot of kids did not do the post quiz. I expect you to do these things that I'm assigning you. And Wednesday, Boston Massacre. You want to make sure that when you complete the Boston Massacre module, you are actually doing these things that I am assigning you to do. In a second here, this will swing its way down to the Boston Massacre module that you were doing on Wednesday. You were finding some slides of the Boston area, kind of taking a little tour of Boston. You were watching a video from the Boston Massacre. Again, not hard to do, 3 minutes. I expect you to do this. Be sure, though, that you have done the slides first, and then the video, and then the LEQ. Let me turn up the heat again and say I'm very disappointed with the number of kids who did not do these things. Cutting your arm off would be hard. I'm not asking you to cut your arm off. I'm asking you to collect 10 or 11 pictures, watch a 3-minute video, and answer a question. This is not hard. You can do it. Let me also give you a grumpy little speech. A lot of our class revolves around the American Civil War. And at the end of the war, slavery is over. Maybe as many as 4 million slaves now are free people. What's the number one thing those slaves want after the war is over? What do they really need to be successful? Do they want a house? Do they want land? Do they want equipment? Do they want, the number one thing they want, the number one thing that former slaves want is an education. And they are desperate to be educated. If you're not learning in school, you're not doing these things we're asking for, you are fighting off an education. And I don't really understand that. Education is good, as proven by those former slaves who didn't have a right to be educated, and they want it badly. I want you to imitate that. I want you to embrace learning and knowledge. Knowledge is our friend. Do your work. Now, let me tell you in a very negative sort of way, but you can turn this into a positive by actually doing what you've been asked to do. Next week when I'm back, I plan to learn how to load and fire the cardboard tube guns and go outside and reenact battles and things. If you're not doing your work, there is no chance we're going to do that. We'll have to stay inside and get you caught up on things. So you want to make sure that you are embracing education, embracing the learning. If you're not exactly sure how to do something, like, let's say the Boston Images slides, you're collecting these pictures and you're cutting and pasting them, into a Google Slides document. If you're not really sure how to do that, ask somebody, get some help. If you're not really sure how to submit this, it's okay to ask someone and get some help. If you are not exactly sure how to answer an LEQ, you can do that. I have here the pictures that I did. It's really not a great trick to do this. So you want to be sure that you're doing it, you're doing what I've asked you to do, and you are learning, because learning is good. All right, enough of that grumpy little speech. And I expect you to get your work done and do it well. And when I'm watching you on ClassWise, I expect not to have to freeze anybody else's screen and tell you to get back to work. All right, have a nice day.